Welcome to the VB Toolbox in part one of my series on working with Microsoft Access in Visual Basic.net. In this tutorial, we will be learning how to connect to a Microsoft Access database. I will be using Microsoft Access 2010. The differences between different versions are not really significant other than different connection strings and the support files required by the client in the event that you don't actually have Microsoft Access installed on the machine. It doesn't have to be installed, but you will need support libraries in order to access that. I will show you what those are here. If you don't have Microsoft Access installed on your machine, you may get an error that looks similar to this. Don't panic. You can still open the Access database and work with it in Visual Basic if you install the redistributable for the Microsoft Access database engine. Okay, and you will want to make sure that you have the correct version, and also if your Access database was created in Office 64-bit version, you won't be able to open it with 32-bit and vice versa, I don't believe. So make sure that you have the right one. If you hit the download link here, you'll have the 64-bit version and the 32-bit version. This is what I'm using in this tutorial. So if you download the source code in the description, make sure that you either have the 32-bit version of Access installed or you download this free file from Microsoft. I will provide a shortcut in the description there so you can get a hold of that. Alright, anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to begin by clicking New Project, and I want a Windows Forms application, and you can call this whatever you want. Let's call mine MS Access and hit OK. That will generate our project template. We can just go ahead and stretch this form out a little bit. And I want to add a few items to this screen. So I'm going to be showing you how to load database items into a combo box, use a text box for searching and filtering, and also I want to show you how to load records from your Access database into a data grid view. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a data grid view onto my form, and we want to set a few basic properties. By default it wants to offer to use the wizard and set this up. I like to code everything. I prefer not to use the wizard, so I really have a strong understanding of how everything is working together. If you like using wizards, that's absolutely okay, but that knowledge may not apply to this particular tutorial. So let's find a combo box next and add that to the form. And we will change the properties of some of these controls in a little bit. Next up, I'm going to add a text box. Find that. And you can click on that, add that right in here. And this is the field that we'll use for searching our database. This is a nice little feature. Show you how to make a nice little search feature. And next I want a button. I'm going to throw that in right here. Oops, I got that a little bit small. Alright. So, I probably got a little more space in there than I really need. Doesn't really matter. Let's change some of the properties on these controls. First up, I want to make this a read-only control so the user doesn't type it in, and you'll kind of see why later on. To do that, select the control by left-clicking on it and go to the drop-down style property, and where it says drop-down, change it to drop-down list, and that just makes it a read-only drop-down filter. Next up, actually let's change the name of the combo box. I'm going to call this one CBX Users, combo box users. And what I'll be doing is just pulling usernames out of my database and populating this. And you can use these. These are great for creating dynamic queries and filters and whatnot for your database. So just something, you know, that I want to show you how to do, and you can apply that, you know, in any way that you see fit. Next up, I'm going to take this text box here and I'm going to change the name of it to txt find. This will be our search bar, and I'm going to change the name of this button to CMD, sorry, classic command button, find. And I'll change the text as well. If we scroll down, find the text property of that button, you can change that to find. And finally, let's take our data grid view here and change some of the properties. The name of the data grid views is really long, so I'm going to shorten that to DGV data. Okay, this is where we're going to display our query results. Another property I want to set on here, I'd like to be able to expand this with the form. So if you find the anchor property, you can change the layout here. It's right there. Drop that down and just tick these little boxes right here, and what that'll do is it will anchor it to the form boundaries. So if we were to run this, I didn't like one of my properties apparently. Yeah, I think every once in a while you do have some issues with those. Let me try that again. Click on that, select the anchor, tick these guys, click off of it. Is it happy? Try running it, and there it goes. Not sure why it does that. Now it should stretch with the form, so that's pretty handy. Yeah, don't panic. If you try it, you know, another thing, if you are in debug mode and you attempt to change properties like that, it will throw the same little error, you know, invalid. But just make sure that all of these are ticked, and then click out somewhere and it seems to save it a little better. All right, now we need something very important, and that would be our Access database. Now, I haven't even added one. You're going to need an Access database from somewhere. I'm not sure if you can actually create one of these on the fly with VB.net. I haven't tried doing that. I'll provide a link to the project source so you can actually have access to my little Access database in this project, or you can create your own if you have Microsoft Access on your machine. So I'm going to add a new item. Actually, I think I want an existing item. Sorry about that. And what I need, I haven't actually saved this project. Sorry, I'm going to get myself together here. I'm going to save this so it has its own folder. I'll try this again. Add existing item. There we go. That looks a lot better. Puts us in its folder. It just hadn't been named yet. So now I'm going to go ahead and just copy from another folder my Access database. I'm going to bring that in there. Just going to paste it into this window here. And you can't see it because right now it's restricted to these types of files. I'm going to go down and select all files, and there's my Access database. You notice there's no icon associated. I don't actually have Microsoft Access installed on this computer. I created this on another machine. I just kind of wanted to prove to you that you can access a database without having it installed. So once you do that, it brings up this wizard, and you can choose a database model. Again, I don't want to use the wizards. I want to know exactly how everything's working. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. You should have this nice little Access database container now. If you double click on that, because we don't actually have all of the tools installed, I don't think that you can really change the properties of the database. You should be able to change any of those with code, or by running queries. So like if we click this, we get access to these tables, and you can run, selects and inserts and different SQL commands against that table, that database. So there is a lot of power there still, but you pretty much have to do it all yourself without the ease of having the Access database program. I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. What I have is just a small single table database here with a few users, some passwords, and plain text, which is not always really not a good idea, but just for the sake of the demonstration, really all we want to do is connect to the database and pull out records. So I'm going to add, if you've seen any of my other database tutorials, I like to create my own control class for accessing the database and running my queries against it, or commands. So what I'm going to do is add a class, and I'm going to call this class dbcontrol.vb. Click add, and I will get a blank class template. And now this is where the guts of our program are going to be. First thing we need to do is provide access to the system.data.ole or OLEDB namespace, and this gives us access to the ACE driver for accessing either Microsoft Excel documents or Access databases. Yeah, you can actually use Microsoft Excel as a database with Visual Basic. It's kind of cool. Not always practical, but it's neat. So I'm going to say imports system.data.OLEDB, and that's the only namespace we really need access to here. So first up, we want to create our database connection, and this is, we'll just say I want it to be private. I don't need to access it from any other classes unless I wanted to provide some sort of overriding features, which is totally okay. I'm going to say I want to create our DB connection as a new OLEDB connection, and my connection string, I'm just going to hard code in here. We want to use provider equals Microsoft .ace .OLEDB 12.0, and we'll end that with a semicolon. And I'm just going to drop down a line here, ampersand and underscore, and continue my string. And now we need to provide the data source. So my data source will be equal to the name of my database. So sample.accdb. So I actually point to your database file. And the reason I'm not providing any pathing information is because I'm using relative pathing. There's no, using anything else like, a static path like :/, and someplace on your hard drive, you got to move that to another machine and that directory doesn't exist. You run into some problems. So this just says, look only in the folder that my application exe file is launching from. So in this case, in our debug or Visual Studio, it's going to be in the debug folder in bin. So wherever this exe file is, that's where the Access database needs to be. You'll notice that is currently not in there. We haven't built the project, so it hasn't added it. If we click on that database, there is one important thing you probably want to select. Copy to output directory. A lot of times people have run into a little issue where they make changes in their application to the database. It updates the database copy that's in their debug folder, but this does not reside in the debug folder. This is the master copy. So if you set it to always copy, as soon as you hit the debug button and it builds the project, it will overwrite whatever is in your debug folder with the master copy. So you wipe out your changes that way. It's best to just make changes to the master copy and then set this to copy if newer. So you can experiment in the temporary one, the one that's in the debug folder, and it will only overwrite with the master copy if the master copy changes. Okay, so we set that to if newer, copy if newer. I'll go ahead and save my project here. I hope that made sense. So once we have our DB connection set up, we need to create a variable, a temporary variable here for our database command. So I'm just going to say prepare DB command. Okay, and this is just going to be private DB CMD as an OLEDB command. Now, if you followed any of my other tutorials, you'll notice that this DB control class, for example, is nearly identical to the SQL control class or MySQL control class that we've used previously. And it really is. The only actual difference that you'll see is in the connection string, or in the namespace, I'm sorry, the OLEDB. So now we want a place to store our data. So I'm going to say DB database data. Storing and handling actually would probably be a better description. I'm going to say public, and the reason I'm making this one public is because I need access to this from my main form. So I'm going to call this one DBDA, and this is going to be my data adapter as OLEDB data adapter. And the data adapter is used for executing commands against your database and performing other actions like filling our data tables or data sets. And I'm going to create our data table or data set next. And I am just going to use a straight up data table instead of a data set as I usually use. You can use either one. They both work. So this just takes away a little bit of coding in the future. Saves us some lines. Next up, we want a simple way to manage query parameters. This is just, it's not something that's required, but it's something I like to use. Query parameters are very important for querying and updating your data for reasons, you know, there's various reasons like handling data types and also preventing SQL injection attacks and things like that. So I think it's very important to learn how to use these, and they're really surprisingly simple. As I'm just going to create this as a list collection, so I'm going to create a new, make sure you put new in there, list collection of OLEDB parameters. Okay, and we'll create a little sub down below for managing these simply. And finally, it's nice to be able to keep track of some query statistics, record counts, and especially the exception. Very important to manage your errors in your code. So say query statistics. I knew I spelled that incorrectly. And I want these to be public. So the first one is going to be the record count. I'm just going to make that an integer. And next up, I want a string to hold my exceptions in, or errors. Public exception as string. And that just lets us know when our query or application threw an error in this while we were running through a query or command. So this is where the magic happens, the execute query statement. And with these OLEDB commands, there are a lot of different methods for running queries and executing non-queries versus queries. I like to be able to just handle them both at the same time instead of having to code separate subs for updates and deletions and straight up queries that are supposed to return data. So this sub is going to do it all. So I'm going to say public sub exec query, and I'm going to add one parameter. That's just going to be the query string as a string. Okay, very simple. First thing we do when we execute this is reset our query statistics. Okay, and I'm going to do record count equals 0, and exception is just going to be a blank string. Okay, and I'll show you how we use that later on here. And here we're going to want to use a try-catch statement to isolate any errors and keep our application from crashing hard. It's nice to manage your errors as smoothly as possible. So we're going to just do try, and it should generate the rest of the statement for you. We'll say open a connection. It's the first thing we need to do. And to do this is very simple. We just say dbcon.open. If it is unable to open the database, if it's unable to perform this very basic command, it's going to fail, and it will report the exception in this string, and we will capture it from our main form. Next up, we will create our database command. And to do this, all we have to do is say dbcmd equals a new OLEDB command. And we want to execute the query string as provided in our parameter. And we want to execute it against our database connection, dbcon. Again, nice and simple. And once we've created our command, any parameters that we supply during query time should be added to that before it is executed. So we'll say load params into db command. Okay. So I'm going to say params dot for each, and this is going to be a nice simple little one-line lambda statement. If you're running Visual Basic.NET 2008, these lambda statements do not work the same, so you'll have to code it. You can still do it, you just have to code it differently. Instead of one line, you have to do a standard for each expression. So we'll say for each sub p, and that's going to be our parameter, db cmd dot parameters dot add p. Okay, now I will kind of try to explain what this is doing. This is going, the for each expression here loops through the parameters list that we created up here, finds every parameter in the list, and executes this lambda or nameless sub routine, passing the parameter that it finds on each loop into this sub, and then we run the parameters.add method for our database command and add that parameter to it, being. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Lambdas are absolutely phenomenal, especially when it comes to minimizing the number of lines of code you need. Generally, what you might have to do, again, like if you're running Visual Basic 2008, for example, you could write this as for each p as OLEDB, is it command? I wonder if it's OLEDB parameter. Oh, there you go. OLEDB parameter in dbcmd dot parameters. Okay, so that. Oh, I'm sorry. We want to loop through the list. Go in the wrong direction here. So essentially, this is how you would do it. If you didn't want to do a one-line lambda here, then you just say same thing we said before, dbcmd dot parameters dot add p, and it would accept that. But instead, we condense that down into a single line. It's just a very simplistic expression. So once we've added our parameters in from our list, we then want to purge that list. So next time we run a query, it doesn't have the same old parameters that we used before. Then we can get errors if we don't do this. So next thing we need to do is clear params list. And to do that is very simple. To purge a list, you just say params.clear. Boom, all the records are gone from that. And next up, finally, actually, we're going to execute our command and fill our data set. So execute command and fill our data set. Okay, or I guess in this case it's a data table. So we need to create a new data table first. We're going to say db db data table equals a new data table, and then I'm going to use my data adapter. I'm going to say db da equals new OLEDB data adapter. Remember, this is where the action occurs, and I'm going to execute the db command with that data adapter. Okay, and once I do that, then whatever was piped into here, it could be a select expression or an update command or anything else, it gets executed at this point. And then we can use the records to fill, let's say record count equals db data adapter dot fill. And what do we want to fill? We want to fill up our data table. So we're going to say db dt, and once we do that, all of our query results are loaded into this data table, and they are ready then to output onto our form. Okay, so that is what's occurring there. As soon as you hit the fill, it pipes that data into our data table. And really, that is it. Next up, we want to capture any errors. So we're just going to say exception equals ex.message. Okay, that's very easy. And once you're done doing all of your work, because I like to work in offline mode as opposed to online mode, you probably want to close your connection to the database, and that leaves it available for others if you're in a multi-user environment. Should unlock any records that you had locked and whatnot. So close your connection. It's always a good idea. You don't want to leave your database connection open. It can cause problems. So we're going to say if the database connection state is open, then dbcon.close. Always close the door on your way out. And that's it. we are ready to execute queries. And the beauty is, once you've created this, you can reuse it for any number of databases, or it's really nice, portable, and reusable code. There's one last thing that we need to do here, and that is to manage our parameters list. Okay, right here we're using our parameters list and we're clearing it, but we don't have a way to actually add parameters in that very simply. So here we'll say include query and command parameters. Okay, so we're just going to create a very simple little sub here. We like simple, right? Add param, and we have to supply two values here. We have to give it a name as a string and the value. And the value needs to be more nebulous than just a string. The value needs to be an object, which means it can really be any data type. When you're passing different values into your database, sometimes you've got strict controls on what goes into what fields. Is it a Boolean value? Is it a string, an integer, or any other type of data? So this needs to be very flexible, so we can add any type of data to our, as a parameter for working with the database. So here I'm just going to create a quick variable. I'm going to say new param as a new OLEDB parameter. And we are going to provide a name from the name and the value. And when we're done, we're going to add it to our list. So we'll say params, that's our list, dot add our new parameter. And then it's done. So this class is absolutely complete now, and if we can find our database, it might, I'm not sure, I haven't actually copied it to ran a build on it. I probably need to do that before I actually run this, or it might throw an error at me. Might try accessing the data. Of course, I'm not actually calling my class yet, so. But the class is ready to be called. So now we can begin the part where we actually connect to the database and start doing some queries. So let's just run a quick query. When the form starts up, you can select your form and press F7 or double click on it. I want the form 1 event, so I'm going to grab that because I want to find the form shown event. This is better than using the form load event. Form load event kind of, I don't know, some things execute before the form has fully initialized, and you can get different errors, and sometimes it suppresses errors that you should see. So I prefer to use the shown event in place of that. All we need here to access our new fancy DB control class is a variable up here. So I'm going to use a private, and I'm just going to call this one access as new DB control. Wow, that was hard. Okay, so from here we can run a query. And let's just test this out first, see if it's going to blow up on us for not actually copying our database into our directory yet. I'm just going to say access dot execute query. And I'm going to do a very simple query here. I'm just going to say select star from members. Okay. Wow. Ultra simple query. This selects all values, all records. Not a good idea in a live environment for performance reason. I'm going to go ahead and run this. Well, it didn't explode. So this executed properly with no errors. At least I think there was no errors. We didn't actually check for them. What we can do is we can say if string dot is null or empty. Actually, we want to see if it's not empty. If there's nothing in the exception, where was that? In our DB control class. If there's nothing in the exception, that means it executed successfully. Okay, doesn't necessarily mean that any records will be returned, but it did execute without errors. So if not string is null or empty means the exact opposite of that. It means that there is something in there. There is an error that was detected. So we'll say then message us and tell us what the error is. So we'll say access dot exception will be our message. And I'm just going to tack on a little one line just to keep this nice and small. Whoops, I forgot to actually specify the string that I want to check here. Access dot exception. Helps if I can type. All right, so I'm checking this string to see if it's null or empty. If it is empty, good. If it's not empty, bad. Okay. If we get an error, we don't want to keep trying to execute more code on our broken data source. So we're just going to exit out of the sub. So let's run this, see if we get an error. No errors. That's a very good sign. All right. Let's force an error into this. Let's see. Our table name is members. I'm going to say members X. So I'm going to try selecting data from a table that doesn't exist. Boom. Didn't like that. Okay. So Microsoft Access Database Engine cannot find the input table or query members X. All right. So we know that our query exceptions are working properly, and you notice it didn't crash our application. That's because we used the try catch. Most of you are probably already familiar with the try catch statements, but that's kind of how that happened, how that works. So you can handle those errors gracefully, and then just exit out and discontinue running any code against it. So let's take this a step further. Let's some of you would like to know, how do you get the data from the database into the data grid view? Well, this is surprisingly simple. All you have to do is fill the data grid. What we're going to do is set the data grid's data source property to be equal to the database data table that we filled with our data adapter in our DB control. So this guy right here, after this fills it, the data gets pumped into this table, and from there it can be piped out into this data grid view very simply. So just going to say DGV data, that's what we named it, dot data source equals access dot DB data table. Let's try executing this now. Whoop, I forgot to fix my table. Hey, look at that. We can see all of our data. Well, that concludes this tutorial. All right, just kidding, there's more. Let's have some more fun with this. That's pretty much how you access your data. I mean, you could quit watching at this point if you want, but I recommend sticking around and, enjoying the show. So what if we want to fill up that combo box with first names or the usernames? We want to create a dynamic query, or just create a cool list of just usernames and put it into this drop down. What we can do is we can fill the combo box by saying for each. I wish I could use a lambda here. I can't without creating my own extension method on the data, the rows. So For each R as data, whoops, that's got to be a data row in access dot data table dot rows. We'll say CBX users, that's our combo box, dot items dot add R being our data row and the name of the column that we want to add. In this case, it's going to be the username, so we put that in quotes, just like that. Now look, we have successfully pulled in all of our users, and we could complicate this query a little bit too. You know, we could say, I only want to see active members. Or, you know, you want a specific user ID or something like that. Or you just want to sort it. You could filter this, you could sort the query. Right now they're not alphabetically arranged. So we could come up here and say order by username. You could even throw in an ascending value. Run that, and now they're in alphabetical order. Both lists are, because they're both pulling from the same data set. Could also reverse that. Now it's going top down. Awesome. Okay. So now what to do? One thing I do like to do, I'm going to set this back to an ascending sort order. You notice that this starts up and it doesn't show, we don't really have any indication that this list was populated. So what if I want to grab the very first value that it found in the event that it did find some values? This is pretty easy to do. We don't want to go in our for each loop. We want to come down here and say display first name found, and I'll say if access dot record count is greater than 0. And the reason I'm doing this is if we try setting the index value on the combo box when there are no items in it, it's not going to be happy because it's like an array, and you try calling something from an array that doesn't exist, it's going to crash on you. So we want there to at least be one record in there before we attempt to do this. Then combo, sorry I got cut off there, combo box users dot selected index equals 0. And that should give us some indication that data was found. See? Grab the first username it found, popped it into that value. You could run all sorts of other things. You could do a selected index change event to, when you select a person, it will fill, text boxes with that specific user's information. And I may actually do that in an upcoming tutorial for creating dynamic searches, which would be really cool. In this tutorial, I intend to do a very basic wildcard search based on the username. So there's still more to come here. Let's go ahead and get started with that. Now, one other thing that I really like to do is find any way that I can to shorten my code, because I hate it when I just have massive numbers of lines of code. And if I can just shrink it in any way possible, keep it more readable, that's something I like to do. And one very, very silly and simple thing that I like to do is shorten some of these expressions, or make a reusable function or something to shorten them. So I'm just going to do this private function because we want to return a value. I'm just going to say not empty, and I want to check the text as a string and return a Boolean value. So as Boolean. I just want to see if the string is empty or not, okay? And it's essentially this chunk of code here. I just think that's long. If you have to do this, you know, we're doing this one time here, maybe two as we go along, but if you have a full-blown application, that can, you know, that makes a lot of characters extra work, in my opinion. So I want to just return exactly what I'm doing here. So I'm going to say return not string dot is null or empty, and I'm going to use my text for my parameter here and just pipe that in, and that should give me the same result as this, and it just knocks off a little bit of length. So I can just say not empty. All right, and that should still work. Yeah. Good. All right, fix that. Check it out one more time. Oh yeah, that's nice. Okay. So what do we want to do next? We want to be able to perform a search, a wildcard search on our database and return specific values. This is actually very simple and kind of fun. So we're going to say private sub search member. We're going to create a member search, not a member. And we want to search by the name as a string. And this time I'm going to show you how to use the command parameters that we created. And these beauties are nice for preventing SQL injection attacks. Some databases have built-in protection against SQL injection or SQL injection. Some databases don't. But what it does is it prevents users from tampering with the database by injecting or using prematurely terminating strings. And using parameters does this automatically by bypassing, you know, it literally pipes all of the text. It can't break the string, pipes it into the query command. So it's kind of hard to explain. Definitely worth researching some. Go look it up. You can get it. I actually have a tutorial from before, a SQL Server tutorial, where I actually demonstrate it to some degree. So, so we want to add parameters and run our query. To do this, we're just going to say access.addParam, calling upon our method that we created to add parameters to our parameter list. And the way we generally do this in most databases, I don't know if it's certainly not a requirement, I don't think. This creates a database variable. These parameters are like database variables. So what I'm going to do is do @user for the name of my parameter, and the value that I want to supply is my search string, any search characters that I want to run through the database. However, I want to use wildcards, and to use wildcards we're going to use a percentage, a %sign, and then you concatenate on the text that you added. So in this case it's going to be whatever is supplied in the name parameter. So we'll say name, and we're going to also end it with a wildcard. So what this says is anything, ignore whatever the username starts with, doesn't matter, and whatever it ends with doesn't matter. As long as it finds name somewhere in that string, then it's a successful match. Okay, so now we can execute our query using this. And another beautiful thing about parameters is you don't have to break your query strings and add in, you know, like a text box value or things like that. It makes it kind of sloppy. So I'm going to say access.execute query. Whoops. And I'm going to say select. I only want to return three different fields. You could just do star like we did above if you want to return all values. In this case, I'm going to do a little more clean query here. I'm just going to select the password, username, and the email address. And after your final line here, because I'm breaking the lines, make sure you put a space, otherwise you get a run on and it'll look weird. Because I'm dropping down here, it's just for, because my screen's kind of small here. I like to shorten my strings a bit. So I'm going to select from the members table, also adding another space at the end of my string. And for my filter, I'm going to say where username equals, or actually I don't want equals, I want to use the like. The like expression allows you to use wildcards, sort of a fuzzier search. So, and here's where we call our parameter, and we just call it by its name, just like it was a variable, and it can be called right inside of our string, as opposed to having to break the string and concatenate on values from other text boxes and whatnot. So much cleaner way to do this, and it stuffs everything in there. It doesn't matter if the end user attempts to hijack your application or tamper with your database. They can't really do anything with that parameter being injected like that. So all right, so once we've got our query ready, we want to report and abort on errors similar to what we did above. So we can just say if, and we'll use our handy dandy little not empty on our access dot exception. If you wanted to even hard code that into this not empty, this just allows you to use any text whatsoever, but realistically we're only using it for specifically for the access exception. You could just have a very basic, if not empty. It's not very descriptive though, so sorry. I always get off on tangents here and end up burning a lot more time than anticipated. Whoops, I already have then. If not empty, if the exception is not empty, then report it, message box. Access dot exception, and then if you use the colon sign, that just adds two lines that would normally be separated by pressing enter. Just puts them on the same line. Those can be good and they can be bad. If they make your code more readable, then good. If they make it less readable, then bad. So combo box. Fill it. We want to put our results in the combo box, same as we did above. So you can just copy that little line there, drop it down because it's identical, and now we have our search. So let's go ahead and add that to our command button. I'm just going to double click on the button to generate our click event, and I will call search member, and the member, what I want to use for the name is txtfind.text. So whatever we put in there, it will search usernames that equal or contain that value because we're using the wildcards. So let's just give this a try. So I'm going to take, I want to find everybody that has pizza in their name. Let's just try that. Hit find. Yay, it worked. So Pizza Dude worked. What if I wanted everybody that has an A in their name? Find. Boom, there they are. So it's working beautifully. We have a wildcard search. We don't even have to search for a full name. We just say, hey, I want to find all the dudes in here. Oh, it's just Pizza Dude. I want to find all the dragons in here. Oh, it's just Dragon Girl. I don't want to search for anything. I'll just leave it blank. Oh, grabs everybody. So very simple searching. And that's really, I think, all I wanted to show you in this particular tutorial. There are a number of other things that we can do with our database, but this will get you started working with Microsoft Access, and really hope this has been a helpful tutorial for you. Leave me comments, suggestions. Give me thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't, I guess. Appreciate you watching and supporting the channel. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.